No one ever said God was a table. That's not the claim in the biblical corpus, not in the least. In fact, the claim is constantly, God is not a part of the natural order, right? He's not Baal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I am who I am.
Yeah, and I am who I am. I am who I was. I am who I will be. That's all in that phrase. It's the spirit that underlies being and becoming itself. It's the process that gives rise to being itself. And it's identical, as far as I can tell, with consciousness. It's the same thing, because that's what we do with our consciousness. We contend with possibility. We're not automatons driven by materialistic determinism. That's not what we're like. It's not even possible technically. You can't compute your way forward into an uncertain future. You can't use an algorithm to do that. Determinism doesn't work. That's not a theory.
Yeah, okay.
We know that.
So if you're saying, if somebody's out there and like, I would like to believe in God if it's real. Let's say they just say that.
Yeah, but you wouldn't. That's the thing.
No, I don't know. I meet people who say, if God exists, I want to know that. I'm not
The price is the cross.
My point is, would you say to them, it's not about looking at philosophical arguments, it's about taking up your cross and following him. That's the quicker path to accepting belief in God than a philosophical syllogism.
Exactly. No, it's a mode of being.
Yeah.
It's a mode of being. It's not a set of beliefs. We were completely wrong about this. You asked earlier why so many people in the intellectual realm are converting. It's because they've understood that. 𝗦𝗢𝗔𝗓𝗍 said this explicitly. We got the question wrong. Does God exist? It's like, well, what? That's not the right question. The right question is, are you going to take your cross and struggle uphill? Because either way, it's faith. Either way.
Yeah.
First of all, I love Jordan Peterson. I think he gets a lot of people thinking. In fact, I'm reading his new book about struggling with God right now. I just want to respond to one thing he said. He said, the question isn't whether or not God exists. It's about taking up your cross, essentially. Well, I think it's both questions. In other words, I think there's a difference between belief that and belief in. Jordan here is talking about belief in, that you ought to believe in Jesus. You ought to take up your cross and follow him. That's going to change your life. That's the most important question. The problem is, what if Jesus really isn't worth believing in? What if he didn't even exist? What if he's not really God? Why trust in him? For that, you've got to see, first of all, does God exist, number one? And number two, did Jesus really rise from the dead? Factually, because if he didn't, he's just another itinerant preacher. We may like some of the things he said. We may find them helpful. We may find them attractive, but he has no more authority than anybody else. We need to discover first that Jesus really did come, die, and rise from the dead for the sins of the world. Then we can trust in him and ought to trust in him. In fact, the writer of the Gospel of John, in the very last couple of verses of chapter 20, sums up this whole difference between belief that and belief in. Here's what John says. He says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Notice that John here puts belief that and belief in the same sentence. He's saying, I'm writing down these signs so that you may believe that Jesus really is the Son of God. And now you can move from that fact to trusting in him. So faith is not just blind. I don't have any evidence. That's not really what biblical faith is. Faith, in the biblical sense, is trusting in what you have good evidence to believe that is true. Trusting in Jesus because you have good evidence to believe that he truly is the Son of God. In fact, we know the difference between belief that and belief in relationships. When I first met my wife 40 or so years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife, but all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. That's the difference between belief that and belief in. Jesus really is the Son of God. He's God incarnate. And for that reason, it makes sense to go from believing that fact to trusting in him, to have our sins forgiven, and then to be given his righteousness.